Princess Lyra stood tall at the grand balcony of the royal palace, looking down at the bustling city below. It was a city of shining towers and bustling markets, filled with 1,000 different species and races. The alien world she ruled was known far and wide for its beauty and advanced technology. But despite the grandeur of her surroundings, Lyra felt trapped. The weight of her royal title pressed on her shoulders, heavy and suffocating. For years, her father, King Theros, had sent suitor after suitor to win her hand in marriage. Some were wealthy princes from neighboring star systems. Others were powerful generals, commanders of vast fleets. They brought gifts of jewels and exotic creatures, hoping to impress the princess. But Lyra turned them all away. She had no interest in their wealth or titles. What use was a grand palace if it felt empty? What good were jewels when they could not fill the hole in her heart? The princess longed for something more than the political alliances that these suitors represented. She wanted something real, something true. Her heart beat to its own rhythm, and it was not in sync with the customs and traditions of her people. Lyra had witnessed enough to know that marriages arranged for power were often cold, calculating affairs. She refused to be a pawn in her father's grand game. Today, as she gazed out at the city, she thought about the latest suitor her father had brought to her. Prince Corin of the Zintar system. He was tall, handsome, and every bit the nobleman, but he had no depth. He could speak endlessly about his family's legacy, his military victories, and his conquests. But when it came to matters of the heart, he was empty. His words lacked warmth, and his eyes reflected nothing more than ambition. Lyra had seen this before. Corin had come to her as a part of her father's plan to strengthen their alliances with other star systems. He had expected her to be impressed by his status and power. But Lyra saw through him. She saw how empty he was inside, how desperate he was to claim her as another jewel in his crown. She had rejected him the same way she had rejected every suitor before him. King Theros was furious, of course. He had been patient, but his patience was running thin. Lyra could feel the weight of his disappointment in her every glance. Her father believed that a powerful marriage would secure their future, both for the kingdom and for their family. He didn't understand her desire for something deeper, something that went beyond titles and crowns. "I will not marry him," Lyra had said to her father earlier that day. Her voice was calm but firm. "You must, Lyra," King Theros had replied, his voice tight with frustration. "We are at a crossroads. If you do not choose a suitor soon, the future of our kingdom will be in jeopardy." Lyra had wanted to argue, but she knew it would be pointless. Her father was a king, bound by duty, honor, and tradition. He could not see beyond the political game he played, and in his eyes, she was a prize to be won, a tool to cement alliances. But Lyra was not a tool. She was a person with her own dreams, her own desires. She would not be used. As the day wore on, Lyra retired to her chambers. The palace was quiet now, and she could hear the soft hum of the city below. Her room was adorned with tapestries of her ancestors and large windows that offered a stunning view of the cityscape. But the view no longer brought her joy. Everything seemed distant and cold. The life she was supposed to lead felt like a distant memory, and she was growing weary of pretending it was enough. Her thoughts drifted to the countless suitors she had turned away. One after the other, they had come to her with their proposals. They had tried to charm her, to impress her, but it never worked. She was not moved by their gifts or their grand speeches. She wanted something more, something that would stir her soul, something that would make her heart race. But no one had come close. Not until now. Rumors had begun circulating about a human soldier who had survived the deadliest battle the galaxy had ever seen. His name was Jack Carter, a young cadet who had fought with unmatched bravery against overwhelming odds. The stories spoke of his courage, his resolve, and his ability to stay calm in the most intense situations. Lyra had heard whispers of him in the palace halls, and her curiosity had been piqued. What made this human different from all the others? Why did his name linger in her mind? She had never met a human before. Humans were a strange species, small compared to her own, but fierce in their determination. They had a reputation for being resourceful and resilient, able to adapt to any situation. But what could a human offer her? And why did she care? Lyra shook her head, pushing the thoughts away. She was a princess. She had a duty to her people, to her kingdom. She could not afford to entertain such distractions. But even as she told herself this, a small part of her couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to meet this soldier. To see if the rumors were true. Perhaps, just perhaps, he could be different from all the others. The sun was setting on the royal palace when word came that the human cadet, Jack Carter, had arrived. The royal court was buzzing with excitement and confusion. Why was a human sent as part of a peace delegation? It was unheard of for a human to be part of such important matters. But the king had ordered that this cadet be treated with respect, and Lyra had no choice but to comply. Her father, King Tharos, was waiting in the throne room when the delegation arrived. Lyra stood beside him, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She had to put on the mask of royalty, the one that made her appear calm and composed, even though her mind was racing with questions. Who was this human? What made him so special that he was chosen for such an important mission? The large doors to the throne room opened with a heavy creak, and in walked a group of officials and dignitaries, but at the front, walking with the kind of quiet confidence that only those who had seen battle could possess, was Jack Carter. He was unlike any suitor she had seen before. His uniform was simple, worn with the marks of someone who had seen far too many battles. His eyes, though, were what caught her attention. They were not the cold, calculating eyes of the suitors who had come before him. His eyes were different. They were filled with something. Strength, yes, but also warmth. They seemed to speak a language that Lyra had never encountered before. Jack stopped in front of King Tharos and bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect, but nothing more. He did not kneel or speak flowery words of praise. He simply stood there, waiting for the king's words. Lyra couldn't help but notice how still he was, how poised in a way that no one had been in her court. "Welcome, Cadet Carter," King Tharos said in a booming voice. "We are pleased to have you here as part of this important delegation. The peace between our worlds is of the utmost importance, and I trust you will handle this mission with the greatest care." Jack nodded, but it was his next words that made Lyra pause. "I am honored to be here, Your Majesty," Jack said, his voice steady but without the usual pomp or pride. "But I'm not here for politics or fame. I'm here to do my part, just as any soldier would." Lyra couldn't help but watch him closely as he spoke. There was no arrogance, no pretense, just a quiet humility. Something in her shifted, though she couldn't explain what it was. The ceremony that followed was nothing special in Lyra's eyes. There were speeches, pleasantries exchanged, and the usual diplomatic niceties. But all she could think about was Jack Carter. She tried to push the thoughts aside, but they kept coming back. Later that evening, as the festivities were in full swing, Lyra found herself walking the palace gardens alone. The moonlight shimmered on the crystal paths, and the scent of exotic flowers filled the air. It was a place where she often went to think, to clear her mind. She walked with purpose, trying to focus on the beauty of the garden, but every step seemed to bring her thoughts back to the human cadet. She had seen humans in the royal archives, their wars, their courage, their history, but she had never met one in person, and Jack Carter was nothing like the stories she had heard. Lyra paused at the edge of the garden, where the palace walls met the dark forest beyond. The sound of footsteps behind her startled her, and she turned to find Jack standing there. He had removed his formal attire, now wearing a simple jacket that showed the wear of travel. His presence was calm, yet there was something magnetic about him. "Princess Lyra," Jack said, his voice low but respectful. "I hope I'm not intruding." Lyra blinked, surprised to see him there, but she quickly regained her composure. "No, Cadet Carter," she said, her voice a little colder than she intended. "This is my space to think. I do not mind your company." Jack stepped forward slowly, not invading her space but also not stepping back. "It's strange, isn't it?" he said, his voice thoughtful. "All the politics, all the scheming, all the pretending. Sometimes it feels like we're all just actors in a play we didn't write." Lyra glanced at him, her heart racing slightly. She didn't expect him to speak like this, so openly, so honestly. "You have no interest in the politics of this court?" she asked, curious. Jack shook his head, his gaze focused on the distant stars. "My interest is in the people I'm meant to protect, not the politics that separate us. I've seen too much of war and its cost to care for anything else." Lyra felt a pang of recognition. She had never experienced war, but she had seen enough of the consequences of violence, the destruction, the suffering, the endless cycle of it. It had shaped her more than she would ever admit to anyone, even herself. "Then why do you fight?" Lyra asked, her voice soft, almost whispering. Jack turned to her then, his gaze meeting hers with a quiet intensity. "Because someone has to," he said simply, "and because I believe that peace is possible, even if it feels impossible sometimes." His words struck something deep inside her. Peace. She had always been taught that peace came through power and strength, through alliances and marriages. But Jack's words made her wonder if there was another way, a way built on trust and mutual respect. For the rest of the evening, Lyra and Jack talked. They spoke of their worlds, their dreams, their hopes, and their fears. They shared stories of their childhoods, their families, and the things that made them who they were. For the first time in years, Lyra felt like she was speaking to someone who understood her, someone who didn't see her as a princess or a tool for power, but as a person. When the night finally grew late, Jack stood up to leave, his expression thoughtful. "Princess," he said, his voice softer now, "I hope that one day you'll understand that the world isn't as complicated as we make it. It's just people trying to get by." Lyra watched him walk away, her mind spinning with thoughts and emotions she hadn't expected. This human, this soldier, had come into her life and unsettled everything she had believed about duty, politics, and power. He was different, and in his difference he had made her question everything she thought she knew about the world. And, for the first time in a long time, Lyra felt a flicker of something inside her heart, a hope that maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than what she had been taught. Days passed after Jack Carter's unexpected arrival, and the royal palace seemed to have settled back into its usual routine. The formal meetings, the endless speeches, and the heavy burden of duty weighed down on Princess Lyra. Yet, despite the return of the usual royal chaos, there was something different in the air. Lyra found herself thinking about the human cadet more and more. His quiet strength, his humble demeanor, and the way he had spoken about peace had left a lasting impression. She would catch glimpses of Jack during official gatherings, his calm presence among the hustle and bustle of the royal court. He was always observing, always silent, and yet there was something magnetic about him. His eyes would often find hers across the room, and for a brief moment, she would feel as though the world around them vanished. It wasn't love. At least, not yet. But it was a connection, something that Lyra had never felt with any of her previous suitors. Her father had noticed, of course. King Tharos was a man of tradition, and he knew how to read his daughter's emotions like no one else. He watched her carefully, noting the small changes in her behavior, the way she seemed distracted, lost in thought. He knew the rumors about the human cadet, how he had survived the galaxy's deadliest battle, and he was not blind to the way his daughter spoke of him in their private conversations. "Lyra," the king said one evening after the latest peace talks, "tell me, what do you think of this human cadet?" Lyra stiffened, not expecting the question. She had tried to keep her thoughts to herself, but it seemed her father had already seen through her attempts at hiding them. "He is different," she said cautiously. "He is not like the others." The king nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing. "Different? In what way?" Lyra hesitated. It was hard to explain the feeling that Jack had awakened in her. She had spent her entire life surrounded by people who wanted something from her: power, wealth, alliances. But Jack had asked for nothing. He didn't care for her title, her royal status, or the political advantage she could bring. He had simply spoken to her as a person, and that was something she had never experienced. "He doesn't see me as a princess," Lyra said softly. "He sees me as a person. And that is rare, Father. Rare in a world where everyone wants something." King Theros studied his daughter for a long moment, his face unreadable. "You are right to be cautious, Lyra," he said at last. "But remember, we cannot let our emotions cloud our judgment. A marriage is about duty, not desire. You must think of your people, your kingdom." "I am," she replied, her voice firm. "But I am also thinking of myself. And for once, I want to know what it feels like to be seen for who I am, not for my title." The king did not respond. He merely turned and walked away, leaving Lyra alone with her thoughts. In the following days, Lyra found herself seeking out Jack more often, whether by accident or design. Their meetings were always brief, always filled with small, casual conversations that seemed to carry more weight than they should. They would talk about the peace talks, about the progress of negotiations, but sometimes the conversations would drift to more personal matters. Lyra learned that Jack had come from a small planet, on the edge of the galaxy, a place where life was simple but hard. He had joined the military at a young age, not for glory, but because he wanted to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. One evening, as the two of them sat on a balcony overlooking the palace gardens, Jack spoke of his childhood, and, for the first time, Lyra saw a glimpse of the pain he carried. "I wasn't always like this," Jack said, his voice soft. "I used to be scared. I wasn't strong, not like the others. But one day, I realized something. I couldn't sit by and watch others suffer while I did nothing. So I joined the military. I fought because I had to, because it was the only way I could make a difference." Lyra listened intently, feeling a deep sense of understanding for him. She had always been surrounded by power, but Jack had chosen a different kind of strength, a strength that came from within, not from the weapons or armor he wore. "You're not like the others," Lyra said, her voice almost a whisper. "You don't fight for honor or for fame. You fight because you believe in something greater than yourself." Jack turned to her, his eyes searching hers. "I don't know if I believe in peace yet," he said quietly, "but I believe in the possibility of it. That's why I'm here, to do whatever I can to make a difference." Lyra's heart stirred at his words. She had been raised to believe that peace could only come through power, through the strength of the royal family and their alliances. But Jack's words challenged everything she had ever known. He didn't believe in peace because of his military might or his royal lineage. He believed in it because he had seen the cost of war, and he wanted something different. As the days passed, their connection deepened. Lyra found herself looking forward to their conversations, their moments together. She would catch herself, smiling whenever she saw him, and her heart would race when he would casually brush past her in the halls. There was no denying it. She was beginning to care for him, but there was also a fear that lingered in the back of her mind. She was a princess. She had a duty to her people, to her kingdom. A marriage to someone like Jack could never be seen as acceptable. Her father would never approve, and the court would never accept a union between a royal princess and a soldier from a distant world. Still, she couldn't ignore what was growing inside her. What if Jack was different? What if he was the one she had been waiting for all along? Her heart was torn between duty and desire, between the expectations of her people and the truth of her own feelings. Then, one evening, when the peace talks were finally concluded and the royal court was celebrating their success, Lyra found herself alone with Jack in the palace gardens once more. The air was warm, and the sounds of laughter and music echoed in the distance. But in that moment, it was just the two of them. Jack turned to her, his expression serious now, and Lyra felt a sudden sense of anticipation in her chest. "Lyra," he began, his voice low, "I need to be honest with you. I'm not here for politics. I'm not here for peace talks. I'm here because He stopped, as if unsure of how to continue. Lyra felt her heart skip a beat, her eyes searching his. "What are you saying, Jack?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jack took a step closer, his gaze locked with hers. "I'm saying that I care about you, more than I ever expected to. I know it's complicated. I know you have a duty, and I know the kingdom needs you. But I'm not asking you to choose between me and your kingdom. I'm just asking for a chance to see if what we have is real." Lyra stood there, her heart racing. This was the moment she had been avoiding. The truth was clear, and it was in her hands now. Would she choose the path her father had set for her, the one of duty and obligation? Or would she follow the path that her heart had started to lead her, down the path where Jack was waiting? The days following Jack's confession seemed to blur together for Lyra. She could no longer ignore the powerful emotions stirring within her heart, yet she was still tethered by the weight of responsibility. The kingdom demanded her loyalty, her duty. But Jack's words echoed in her mind. "I care about you, more than I ever expected to." How could she continue on the path her father had laid out for her when her heart longed for something more? The growing tension was palpable, not, just within her, but across the kingdom. Whispers filled the palace halls, and the court grew uneasy with each passing day. The peace talks were almost complete, but a shadow loomed over the royal family, one that had nothing to do with the peace itself. There were murmurs of rebellion among the lower classes, unrest that threatened to undo everything the kingdom had fought for. It seemed like everything was spiraling toward a crisis. As the tension grew, so did the distance between Lyra and Jack. They both knew what was coming. The final test of her heart. It would soon be time for her to decide whether she would stand with the royal traditions or follow her heart. Yet before she could make a choice, disaster struck. One cold evening, as the stars lit up the sky like 1,000 lanterns, a message arrived. A powerful enemy fleet, the Zartians, had appeared on the edge of the kingdom's territory. They were a ruthless species, known for their brutality and complete lack of mercy. Their presence was not a mere threat. It was an invasion. The kingdom's fleet was outnumbered, and the situation was desperate. King Theros wasted no time. He summoned his generals, and the royal council was called into session. The palace was filled with tension and worry, but Lyra found herself distracted. She couldn't help but feel a deep, unsettling fear in her chest. The Zartians were not just a military threat, they were a symbol of everything she had been running from. The cold, calculated power that ruled over her world. It all came crashing down in that moment. Lyra tried to focus on the task at hand, to listen to the plans and strategies being laid out, but her mind kept drifting to Jack. He was a soldier, a warrior. The Zarshians were a force that even her people could not easily defeat. What would he do? Would he risk his life to fight for the kingdom, even if it meant being separated from her forever? The battle came swiftly, and the news spread like wildfire. The Zartian fleet was advancing, and the kingdom's forces were outmatched. Lyra stood by her father's side, watching as ships prepared for war. The royal palace, usually a symbol of safety and peace, now felt like a prison. "Lyra," her father said, his voice hard and sharp with urgency. "You must remain here. I cannot risk your safety." "But father," Lyra began, but her father cut her off. "No, you have a duty here. The kingdom needs you. You will remain here with the council. Do not argue with me." Lyra's heart pounded in her chest, but she did not protest. She had learned long ago that her father's will was not easily swayed. He would not let her risk her life on the battlefield, not when there was so much at stake. As the battle raged on outside, Lyra could do nothing but wait. Her thoughts constantly returned to Jack. Was he fighting out there? Was he in danger? And if he was, would she ever see him again? The news finally came. The Zartians had broken through the kingdom's defenses, and the royal fleet was retreating. The enemy had made it to the planet's surface. It was chaos. The kingdom's forces were outnumbered and overwhelmed. Lyra's heart sank as the royal council prepared to evacuate the palace. Her father's command was clear. Survival came first. But for Lyra, survival meant something entirely different. It meant knowing that Jack was safe. It meant knowing that he was still out there, still fighting for the peace they had both dreamed of. Without thinking, she rushed from the council room and into the palace halls. Her body moved on instinct, her legs carrying her faster than she ever thought possible. She had to find him. She had to know if he was okay. She had to see him again. The corridors were eerily quiet, the usual hum of the palace now replaced by a heavy silence. Lyra's heart raced in her chest as she rounded a corner, only to find Jack standing there, his eyes full of worry but also determination. He had somehow made his way into the palace despite the chaos outside. "Jack," she whispered, her voice trembling. He turned at the sound of her voice, his face softening with relief. "Lyra," he said, taking a step toward her. "I was looking for you. You shouldn't be out here, it's dangerous." "I don't care about danger," she replied, her voice fierce now. "I care about you. I need to know you're safe." Jack's expression softened, but he shook his head. "I'm a soldier. This is what I do. But you, Lyra, you're more than that. You're a princess. You have a kingdom that needs you." She stepped closer to him, her hand reaching out to gently touch his arm. "I don't want to be just a princess," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I want to be with you." For a moment, there was only silence between them, the weight of their feelings hanging in the air like a storm ready to break. Jack's gaze softened as he looked down at her. "I never wanted to be the hero, Lyra," he said quietly. "I never wanted to be the one who saves the day. But if it means saving you, if it means being with you, I'll fight for that. I'll fight for you." Her heart swelled at his words, and for the first time in days, the fear that had been holding her back melted away. She no longer had to choose between duty and love. She could have both if she dared to believe it. As the battle outside continued, Lyra made her decision. She would not hide behind the walls of the palace. She would stand by Jack, not as a princess, but as a woman. She would fight for the peace they both believed in. "I'm with you, Jack," she said, her voice strong. "Let's end this." The two of them stood together side by side, knowing that whatever the future held, they would face it together. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, Lyra felt a sense of peace. She had chosen her heart, and with Jack by her side, she knew that they could overcome anything. The battle raged outside the royal palace, its sounds a constant reminder of the dangers they faced. Lyra stood beside Jack, her heart beating in her chest as she looked out over the palace grounds. The once peaceful kingdom she had ruled now felt like a battlefield. The Zartian forces were relentless, pushing forward with terrifying speed. Lyra's mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. Could they win? Would they survive this? She glanced at Jack, who stood next to her, his face calm, but with a quiet intensity in his eyes. There was something in the way he carried himself, the way he stood tall even in the face of certain danger, that gave her a sense of hope. He had already risked everything to be here, to fight for her and for her kingdom. She didn't know if she could ask more of him, but in that moment, she realized that she was ready to give everything in return. The sound of footsteps broke her thoughts. A group of royal guards approached, and the leader of the group bowed low before them. "Your Highness," he said, his voice strained with urgency. "The Zartian forces are closing in on the palace. We must evacuate the royal family immediately. The council has ordered it." Lyra nodded slowly, her mind spinning. The people in the palace were her responsibility, but Jack was here, and he was everything she cared about. "I can't leave," she said firmly. "I can't just run away while my people fight. I will not abandon them." The guard hesitated, clearly unsure of how to respond. "Your Highness, please understand. The situation is dire. Your safety is paramount." "I said no," Lyra replied, her voice unwavering. "I will not go." She turned to Jack, meeting his eyes with determination. Jack had always been the one to keep calm in the face of danger, but now Lyra could feel her own strength rising. She wasn't a princess right now. She was a woman who had found love, who was ready to fight for what mattered most. Jack met her gaze and nodded. "We don't have time to argue. The only way we can protect the people we love is by standing together. But we need a plan." Lyra turned to the guards. "Prepare the royal fleet. We'll give the people a chance to escape. If we fight together, we can buy them time." The guards nodded, but Lyra could see the concern in their eyes. They knew the odds were stacked against them, but she didn't care about the odds anymore. She cared about making sure Jack, the man she had come to love, was not left behind. Minutes later, they were at the royal fleet hangars, where ships were being prepared for evacuation. Lyra moved quickly, her every step filled with purpose. The guards scrambled to get everything ready, and the sounds of engines starting filled the air. But then, as they moved toward one of the ships, Lyra froze. She saw a familiar figure standing by the edge of the hangar, a man in royal armor, his face shadowed by his helmet. It was her father, King Theros. He stood tall as always, but there was a weariness in his eyes that made Lyra's heart tighten. "Father," she said softly, stepping toward him. "Lyra," the king replied, his voice rough with emotion. "I was afraid you'd do something foolish." "I'm not running away, Father," Lyra said, her voice firm. "I'm going to fight for our people, for the kingdom." "You've always been stubborn," the king muttered, his gaze flicking to Jack for a moment. "But you're right. We can't just give up. We will stand together, as a family. But there is something you need to understand. This war will not be won by strength alone. It will be won by the choices we make in the face of defeat." Lyra looked at her father, trying to read the emotions hidden in his eyes. He was right, of course. She had spent her whole life learning that power and strength were the keys to survival. But now, standing here with Jack, she knew better. It wasn't power that would save them. It was love. It was unity. It was the belief that they could overcome the impossible together. The sound of gunfire echoed outside, cutting through the quiet tension. The battle was growing closer. Lyra's father placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip surprisingly gentle. "Do what you must, Lyra," he said, his voice filled with quiet pride. "I never wanted to see you in a battle like this, but I see now that you've learned what it means to lead." "Thank you, Father," Lyra whispered, her throat tight with emotion. The king nodded, his face serious. "Go now. Fight. You are more than just a princess. You are the future of this kingdom." With that, the king turned and walked away, leaving Lyra with Jack. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They stood together side by side, the weight of the moment pressing in around them. "You heard him?" Jack said quietly. "You're ready for this. I know you are." Lyra met his gaze, her heart swelling. "I've been ready for a long time, Jack. I just needed to realize it." She reached out, taking his hand in hers. For the first time since the battle had begun, she felt a sense of peace. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that no matter what happened, she wouldn't face it alone. The final battle was upon them. The Zarshian forces were relentless, but Lyra and Jack stood firm. The royal fleet engaged in combat, and the sounds of weapons clashing filled the air. The chaos was overwhelming, but through it all, Lyra never let go of Jack's hand. They fought, side by side, not as a princess and a soldier, but as two people united by love and a shared purpose. Through the smoke and fire of the battlefield, Lyra and Jack found their strength. It was not in the weapons they wielded, but in the unity they shared. They fought not just for the kingdom, but for each other. And in the heat of the battle, it was their love that gave them the courage to stand tall. Hours passed, and the battle showed no signs of slowing down. Lyra's heart raced with every explosion, every burst of gunfire. She could feel the weight of the lives lost, but she couldn't let herself dwell on it. Not now. They had to win. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the tide began to turn. The Zartian forces, overwhelmed by the strength of the royal fleet and the courage of Lyra and Jack, began to retreat. The kingdom had won, but it came at a great cost. Lyra and Jack stood amidst the wreckage, their bodies bruised and battered, but still standing. The battle was over. The kingdom had survived. Jack turned to Lyra, his eyes filled with exhaustion and relief. "We did it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "We did," she whispered back, but the real victory had already been won. In the midst of the war, Lyra had found something far more precious than the kingdom itself. She had found love. And no matter what the future held, she knew that together, she and Jack could face anything. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Lyra and Jack stood side by side, their hearts united in the silent promise of a future built on love, courage, and hope.